Welcome to KBcast, the podcast for security executives, interviewing people from around the globe on how organizations can operate smarter and stay safer. Here's Carissa Breen.
I caught up with Jason Duerden, the managing director from BlackBerry. We spoke about how BlackBerry has pivoted into a cybersecurity player and what their journey was like to do so. We spoke about BlackBerry's capability towards AI and machine learning. I was curious to see how they have approached this and how they are different from other players that exist. Please note, this podcast was recorded at the end of last year. Since then, Jason has left the company, but BlackBerry still believe that this was necessary to release in terms of the content. Jason, I know last time we did try to speak, the audio wasn't working. So now that because we can actually chat in person, I'm really looking forward to be able to talk about you and your journey, but also sort of about the role that you're doing today with BlackBerry. So before we get into BlackBerry and what you guys are doing, we always like to start our podcast off with talking about you and your journey. So please tell our listeners about your journey.
Yeah, sure. And thanks for having me. Appreciate it. Looking forward to the discussion. I think for me, a bit of an interesting entry into security, not necessarily where I thought I was going to end up, but I'm super happy that I did. It's a really cool place to be. I really started out in leisure and tourism industry. I spent a lot of time coming up through school and everything in gaming, and was always into tech and design and kind of creative aspects. So I think that kind of helped with the intrigue of what security is all about. But studied business through school, and that kind of led into the path of getting into kind of sales organizations, and then sort of into security after that. But after spending time in that leisure tourism industry, just had friends in the tech space, not necessarily in cyber, just in other companies. Took a job in a local tech firm here in Sydney. Will be 10 years ago now, probably. And just sort of found my way leaning more towards cyber as an interest area. Spent some time in collaboration and storage and cloud and networking. All really interesting spaces, I feel, but certainly cyber drew me in really, really quickly, and managed to find my way into a pretty cool startup about 4 years ago now, which was called Cylance. Crazy times, just such a innovative way of approaching endpoint security and malware and a whole bunch of other stuff, and really kind of took that business on in this part of the world, and most recently now with BlackBerry after acquisition, which has been really like an experience that you always want to go through, is bringing two companies together, and especially a company like BlackBerry, and I'm sure we'll talk about in a second, where I kind of referred to it, back when I was getting to know the new BlackBerry again, as the world's most well-known company that nobody knows what's going on with the company, if that makes sense. Yep. And then here I am, right? So now, running the ANZ region for BlackBerry, which is good.
One of the things I wanted to sort of just press on a little bit when you spoke about your interest in cyber, what was your initial interest as to why you sort of want to get into this space?
Yeah, I think for me, I've always been interested in crime world, I guess. Right. I love crime documentaries, sure, and war movies, and I love history about modern warfare, ancient warfare, that kind of adversary defender scenario has always been intriguing to me. And that's really what cyber is the
digital version.
Yeah, you have something that somebody else wants, and they're going to try and get it in one way, form or another, albeit just very secretive, right? So it's kind of gives you that adversary defender, plus it's a bit naughty, it's a bit secretive, it has that level of excitement. And I think for me, loving the tech space for so long and being so heavily involved in technology and gaming, also the opportunity is massive because everything is online, and it will continue to be coming online. Like you can connect your shoes and your watch and whatever else you want to, and they all become vulnerable. And I've always, as a personal thing, like I'm a very emotional, caring person, right? So I like to help and be a helper, and I felt like it was a great space for me to be in, where I could put those skills of being around people and helping people, and also liking tech, and then liking that defender adversary. It felt like a really good fit for me and my personality type to maybe make a difference some way or another. Plus the opportunity of career growth. Like I don't think there's ever going to be an issue where there'll be no jobs in cyber, right? It's always going to continue to grow. So yeah.
No, that's really interesting when you say that, and I always like to ask people because I'm really intrigued by their reasoning as to getting into this field. And my interest in getting into this field was similar to yours as well. I was really interested in how hackers worked and how all this cybercrime was happening. I wanted to understand how that's sort of evolving in that space, because as you said, a lot of companies are tech companies now, so it's incumbent that people nowadays understand more about cybersecurity. But Jason, I'm just going to be really, really honest. The last time I really heard of BlackBerry significantly was when you guys were producing handsets. So can you talk to me a little bit about how the brand has evolved from selling handsets and how you guys have moved more specifically into the cybersecurity market?
Yeah, and as I said before, it's the world's best known brand that no one realises what's
also true,
happening,
yes.
Right? So, and BlackBerry's been on a big shift to help educate the market. And one of the really interesting things I find from, and I'll get into the kind of pivot in a second, but just from conversations with people, there's a massive level of curiosity straight off the bat. Like you're kind of curious as to, well, I know the brand, but what's going on, right? Like, so people are interested to listen to it, which is always a bit of a challenge when you're in the tech industry, because you get 1,000 vendors calling you every 5 seconds to talk about the next widget and tool. There's a level of, hey, yeah, I remember working closely with that company at one point in time for handsets or, communications. What are you doing now? So, I mean, I think it's no secret that, BlackBerry potentially lost the mobile phone game to Apple and Samsung back in the day. Sure. But the reality is the core of the company and the core belief of security was always there. People bought BlackBerries because they were secure, right? You couldn't hack a BlackBerry was basically the phrase, which still relatively true today, right. Touch wood. But the reality is governments, financial services, healthcare organisations all around the world were using BlackBerry handsets to secure their communications. Essentially what the company decided to do is their future was no longer in security hardware. They saw future in security software. So it was sort of that 2011, 2012 period. I wasn't with the company then, obviously, but having learnt about it, 2011, 2012 period where the company said, well, how about we have BlackBerry on any device rather than just a BlackBerry device, which creates a much bigger market opportunity for the company. So essentially pivoted all that security capability of secure communication, secure email, secure applications on a handset to be on any device, whether it's Android, iOS, Windows, autonomous vehicles, the space station, like a whole bunch of stuff, because software is transferable, right? You can really put it anywhere as long as you support the OS. So that was sort of 2011, 2012. And the pivot was still primarily focused on secure mobility for the most part, like an MDM, mobile application type management solution. And since that point in time, the company's continued to make strategic acquisitions to really get to a point now where BlackBerry offers that unified endpoint platform. So you've still got the secure mobility from deploy your apps or access Salesforce from your iPad or from your mobile phone or whatever it may be in a secure manner in a containerized solution. But the piece that was missing was really threat management. It's like, well, what happened if the device got taken over by an adversary with malware? That wasn't really something that BlackBerry was providing at that point in time, which is where Cylance comes in, right? So, Cylance, very innovative machine learning AI company to basically do prediction, right? So in a traditional AV world, you would have a big list of bad stuff, a big list of good stuff. And when a threat comes into a device, basically you check the lists. Does it exist on either one? If it's on the good side, you let it go. If it's on the bad side, you don't let it go. The problem that exists there is if you don't know about it, you let it go, which is why ransomware happens every second day, because as soon as it's a new variant in that model, you will never stop it. Has to be seen. So there's always this concept of a sacrificial lamb. Somebody has to be infected for the next person to be protected. In a Cylance world, Stuart McClure and Ryan Perma back in the day decided that that wasn't good enough anymore, because we're always in the hamster wheel of detect, respond, detect, respond, detect, respond. So no one will ever truly get ahead or achieve prevention. Right. And we saw, WannaCry in 2016, 2017, NotPetya. This year, there's just been every second day there's somebody in the headlines. We had the Victorian Health stuff last year. And it's all because of this model of see and respond. So the whole premise of Cylance was to say, well, if we can learn from the past, like a cognitive human, learn from experiences and say, well, if we've seen a lot of these things before, surely when we see a new thing, we can make a pretty accurate decision that, hey, it's probably still a pig, even though it's got lipstick on it, kind of thing, right? So it's like sitting in this room where, you look at the TV up there. You haven't been in this room before, I don't think, but you've seen a million TVs, so you know it's a TV. It's familiar. You're making a calculated mathematical decision that it is what it is. So that was the whole premise. And having that acquisition come into BlackBerry really just formulated that unified strategy. So instead of just offering the communications and the application management and the secure productivity, now you can ensure the integrity of the device while you're also working. And that's really the company strategy moving forward, is really focused on the endpoint, because at the end of the day, the endpoint is now the network, and even more so in COVID pandemic time, because
people working from anywhere.
Exactly. That shift was already kind of happening.
COVID's sort of been the catalyst to the shift being more ubiquitous.
Yeah, and I mean, it's a funny kind of joke that goes around the industry is what drove your digital transformation, and there's a little tick box that says COVID-19, right? So you've probably seen that. Yeah,
I'd like to just go back a step. So when we started talking about like BlackBerry, there were handsets, and you say it sparks curiosity.
Yeah.
Would you say because of that curiosity, you have an advantage over other vendors because we're like, hey, I haven't heard of you guys since like the handsets? Would you say that that's the case because people haven't heard of you and they're curious as to, oh, well, now you guys are in the security market?
Yeah, yes and no. Yes, in a sense of if people were relatively familiar with BlackBerry at one point in time, because most people, when you talk to them about the BlackBerry phone, actually really loved it. Like, they have a very affectionate feeling about the handset itself, because it was like your world changed. You were like, wow, I can do all this stuff on my phone. And today you'd be like, yeah, that's a kind of crappy old phone, but at the point in time it was like an amazing experience. So I think most people who had that experience have a fairly warm affection for the brand and the company, so they're naturally going to be curious. I don't know if it gives us as an advantage, but it allows us to probably have a conversation maybe a little bit easier than potential competitors. But on the other side, if you didn't really have much experience with BlackBerry at that point in time, you would kind of automatically think, well, why am I going to talk to BlackBerry to have a security conversation if I don't really understand what the company was about? So it can go either way. But I think for the most part, there's that general level of curiosity as to, I remember that. What's going on now with the company?
Got you. Yeah, I guess that was part of my reasoning for asking you that question. And I think that just more so, like, how do you think that you'd manage that transition in terms of, like you were saying, that they were talking about hardware, now they're sort of software, and that moving into that security space? Did you sort of find resistance as you guys weren't really a known commodity for doing that?
Yeah, I mean, in transparency, my experience with BlackBerry has been since the Cylance acquisition, right? So I can't...
You were working for Cylance.
Exactly, yeah. So I can't speak too much before that, but I can certainly speak since. And I think since the Cylance acquisition and branding acquisition was a massive plus for BlackBerry, because if you're in the security industry, you pretty much had heard of Cylance, right? Because just crazy explosive growth, very successful, hot startup, innovative, like CrowdStrike and a few other companies in that similar space. People know who they are. Sure. So that probably elevated the BlackBerry brand significantly in that traditional cyber conversation. Like BlackBerry's already had a security backbone, but security and cyber are two different things in a sense. Like you can have security from a collab perspective, you can have cyber from a threat management perspective. So I think that acquisition was really good for BlackBerry for the branding perspective. I think since then, I guess the experience, I haven't had a negative experience is where I'm getting to. It's always been a curious experience. It's always been tell us a bit about why this direction is happening. We're really interested in that. And I certainly think from the cyber perspective, having the Cylance conversation was a pretty easy, common conversation we would have because everybody wants to talk about AI and machine learning. It's the buzzword. It's the sexy thing. It's interesting. It's adding a lot of value. When you bring in all of the traditional BlackBerry capability, people are just like, wow, I didn't even really realize that existed. And that's a really powerful position to have because you extend, your platform and capability with customers. So the other really cool part is the automotive, which, look, unfortunately we don't have manufacturing in Australia anymore. But it's a really cool ecosystem thought for people to understand, well, how does BlackBerry play in that wider IoT space or ecosystem? Just recently, I think it was yesterday or the day before, BlackBerry released a partnership with AWS, which is basically about building the OS for autonomous vehicles or for infotainment systems where, application store, like a Apple store, but for cars, essentially. So thinking about it from that perspective, you've got the device level security and then you've got the infrastructure level security of providing secure IoT devices. So, the long-term vision of the company will be continue to collapse all of those and just create a secure ecosystem. But there's a lot of different interesting things that I think spark curiosity for sure.
One of the things I'd sort of like to ask you about is you mentioned BlackBerry has a different approach towards AI and machine learning. So I asked this because I think there was even a study done that all these vendors saying they do AI and they've got machine learning, and in fact they didn't do that at all in terms of capability. So I'd like to really understand what this looks like, because I'm curious to see how you approach being different and how companies should be approaching this.
Yeah, I mean, that's a really broad, can be a really broad topic. I think there's a couple of ways to think about it. Firstly, machine learning concepts have really been defined by DARPA, so the Defense and Aeronautical or Air Force Research Organization, basically a US government organization, and they define it in sort of 6 waves of machine learning capability. Machine learning is a subset of AI, right? We don't really have true AI in the world yet today. I think we will eventually, but true AI would be, I'm a robot and you're sitting here having this conversation with me as I am today, right? Being able to be cognitive and literally have feelings and emotions and be able to adapt. That is not what we do, right? And that's not what anybody does. Right. But it's a sexy thing to put on the brochure and slap it out there with some marketing and say that it's AI.
Do you think people are still... I mean, in my experience of people saying, AI and machine learning, I feel that there's sort of almost like everyone's saying it, so there's like a deterrent towards you're like the other 55,000 vendors that say that AI and machine learning. Only because when these buzzwords come out, it seems like everyone then uses it. And it almost does a disservice then for the people who are actually doing it. Would you say that that's the case for you guys?
Yeah, I mean, it's current even in today. Like the latest craze is secure access service edge and CASB technologies and all those sorts of things, right? People jump on the bandwagon of momentum. I think, Gartner does their hype cycles and things to show you how that trend goes. Right. I think it was really interesting. I mean, from a Cylance perspective, there's over 80 patents in the field of machine learning for cybersecurity, right? So there is a level of authority that comes from the company who really created the technology. People will say that machine learning and cyber has existed for 20, 30 years. That is also true, right? But using rule-based systems to drive efficiencies is not what we do, right? So that's really just process automation. We use machine learning to make decisions, complex mathematical decisions. So it's a really big difference. So much so that I remember like Cylance first come to market in 2015, 2016, very early days. People would laugh at it because they're like, that's never going to work. Like, how is that ever going to work? So you kind of go through that.
Why do you think they thought that? Were they afraid, perhaps, by the outcome of Cylance?
Yeah, I think so, right? They just... And that's a human behavioural thing because, you know, humans want to be in control. They want to be able to explain and decide. And
they felt like they lost control.
They felt like they were losing a bit of the control and the decision-making process, right? When the reality is we are always going to be less effective at making decisions in comparison to a computer because, you know, we're emotive, we get upset, we drink too many beers, we're hungover, whatever it may be, right? Like, the reality is that's how we are as humans.
But to process the amount of information that machines can do over a human being, but then it also comes down to the fact that why would a human being be processing large amounts of data then anyway? Like, it seems like an ineffective way of a human being's... Totally ineffective, right? And so, like, even to the level of, you know, why should a human be administering an endpoint protection solution? Like, why should you be pushing and checking policies or scanning devices or updating signatures? They're mundane tasks, right? Like, they're meaningless. You should be doing things like threat hunting or, you know, building threat management and vulnerability management programs or doing things like patching, which never gets done because nobody has any time, right? We still can't get that right after like 20 years.
Right, exactly. But it's a pretty arduous task. So I guess on that ML space, it was like, you know, first people ridicule it because they don't trust it and believe it and think it's a bit of marketing fluff. Then people try to imitate or say that it's been happening for a long time, which is what we saw in the AV industry. So say, yeah, we've been doing this for 20 years. Okay, well, if you've been doing it for 20 years, why are breaches continuing to occur every 5 minutes? So they kind of jump on that bandwagon. And then the third phase is active, and this is the best phase because this is when the security industry improves, active development to compete. Right? So the traditional guys start to develop some capability. There's other next-gen technologies out there who also...
Would you mean sort of the bigger players?
You would think, yeah, like a, you know, traditional AV vendor like a Symantec or a McAfee, right? And it's not to say that they're bad companies. They're definitely not bad companies. They just existed at a time and place and they developed technology for that time and place, right? So they've been disrupted and had to innovate. And that all happened to Cylance and BlackBerry. It's just the nature of the way tech industry works. So, you know, it took them a little while to get there. They're starting to do some things. I wouldn't say they're doing the same level of capability, but they're certainly improved, which is good for the industry. Like, you want the competition to continue to get better and better and better because at the end of the day, then we all become more secure as a society. But what you sort of see is different. Now it's really different approaches when it comes to machine learning. There's the approach of prediction, right, which is primarily where we focus. We do behavioural modelling as well, but the primary mechanism that we're really focused on is static prediction. So being able to make a autonomous decision without threat impact. Whereas on the other side, it's more of a behavioural situation where it's like, okay, well, we can detect some anomalies.
Correct.
We're going to try and correlate as much information and then make...
That stage is too late.
Potentially, right? That's also got value. Detect and respond is definitely valuable. You need to have that.
Of course.
We just believe it shouldn't be the primary mechanism.
Well, it's about going beyond that, which is now what you're doing.
Because if you can get to a level of true prevention, it'll never be 100% effective, but let's just, for argument's sake, say it's 95, right? Like, we won't even go to 99.9. We'll just say 95. Right. Then you're only detecting responding to 5%. And you can actually achieve that because if we're doing 95% prevention with machine learning, you're not doing signature updates, you're not scanning, you're not checking policies, you're not worried about agents going AWOL because I haven't talked back to the console and a whole bunch of other stuff. The 5% is handled by the actual threat hunting capability that most organizations are trying to implement. If you flip that around and you say 95% detect and respond, 5% prevent, you need an army of people.
Yeah.
Right? Which, look, big corporates sometimes have that, and that's okay, and that's how they want to work in that operating model. But that's the elite of the elite. That's 1% of the world really has the resources to do that. So,
would you still say that most people are sitting in that 95% though? Are they just so busy trying to get their head above the water? They're not even thinking past detect and respond to, we're going to start predicting stuff. I still feel like a lot of people are still trying to wrap their head around like basic asset management, let alone predictive.
Yeah, I mean, and you should always start there. Like, you can't protect what you don't know about. If you don't know the devices, you don't know what apps you have, you don't know what data you're trying to protect.
Of course.
You don't know what you're vulnerable to, you can't really protect it.
Blind leading the blind man, really.
But the reality is, I feel we use that as an excuse to just keep the same kind of normal process going, right? Like,
why do you think that though? Do you think it's because people are afraid that, as you said before, these old traditional AV players, like the way they've always done it, now they've got players like BlackBerry that are coming in that is disrupting them? Do you think that people are scared of moving into this new way of operating and they don't know that because it's like uncharted waters for these guys?
Yeah, I mean, I don't necessarily think it's a vendor conversation. It's more of a customer conversation. I think there's probably two things. There's a level of I guess internal security is a really interesting space, I think, from a sales engagement perspective, where there's always a level of pride in the selection of a vendor by, a CISO or a CIO or security manager or whatever. Like, they really build close relationships because security is all about trust, right? You need to be able to call on someone when you really need them. When the house is on fire, I need you to come and help me. So security relationships become really strong and really entrenched, and can for many, many years, right? Which can be a difficult barrier to overcome, especially in a very large organization where the tech becomes really entrenched. Change can be really difficult to do. So there's that perception piece. I think the second part also is the cultural aspect of, okay, well, if I do this and we reduce some of those tasks or admin pieces, does that mean I lose my job?
Correct.
What am I going to do? Like, what is the team?
I've been doing this for my whole life. Yeah,
this is what I've been trained as a security analyst. And I guess what we're trying to do is redefine that role. Mm-hmm. You're not an admin. Right. You're a threat hunter.
Yes.
Which is what you should be aspiring to do. Because who wants to come to work and just do admin? Like, it'd be awfully boring.
Correct.
I'd want to come to work and reverse engineer malware and put stuff in sandboxes and, query devices for IOCs and, do all that really fun stuff, which is the perception of the security industry of being in the basement with the hoodie on and looking at code and really cool stuff. But that doesn't really happen that much. There are elite teams that do that, but the vast majority of people end up just doing security and policy administration rather than threat management.
So going just back on the vendor side of it, in terms of these big players, would you say that they are perhaps threatened by upcoming companies, or like even when you're working for Cylance, do you think they felt threatened that, we need to start competing now? Would you say that that's a fair assumption?
Yeah, totally. I think that's natural though, right? As I sort of said, competition is super healthy, innovation is super healthy. Somebody will do it to Cylance and BlackBerry. Those, other companies who have survived, a notable one has pretty much disappeared, like Symantec's pretty much gone now through the Broadcom acquisition, and that writing was probably on the wall for them for a little while. They're still around doing some things with their big customers, but they're really just focused on their top sort of 1,000 global customers now, not really focused on, which is almost no one in Australia, to be honest.
Correct. Yes.
Which is sad, right? Because they were such a pioneer of the industry and drove a lot of the early innovation in security. And I know a lot of great people that have worked there over the years. And to see that go is a little bit sad, I think, for the general industry, but that's just the speed of innovation and new companies coming in. And you've seen other companies like McAfee and other ones innovate and look at other capabilities in cloud technologies and workload security and a bunch of other stuff. The challenge for those companies, I think, is the architectural foundation, when you build a technology in the 80s and 90s versus building a technology in 2010, very different. Like cloud wasn't even a thing back then.
No.
You know, EC2 workloads and things in Amazon wasn't a thing back then. Right? So having that true SaaS, flexible, cloud delivered, like on in seconds model just wasn't a thing. So to completely pivot architecture is a really difficult thing. So what you find with those traditional guys is instead of foundationally building the solution, you add it. You add it on. Right, so you're adding more features to the solution, which creates what we call in the industry bloatware. So you end up with an agent on the device that consumes 600 meg of RAM, crunches the computer when it's doing a scan. You can talk to most people in the industry. They're like, yeah, if I'm doing an A/B scan, I'm going to go to lunch because it's going to be horrible. Right, it's going to take forever. Yeah. And it's that foundational architecture, the way the solution's built. Back then, security was really about indexing. So it was about, check and query. Got this file, got this IOC website, whatever. I'm going to send a query to a database and I'm going to check it, which is not what computers are designed to do. Computers are designed to do complex mathematical problems. So when you fast forward to today with companies like Cylance and BlackBerry and a couple of other companies in the market, the foundation is built on math, mathematical algorithms. So you apply that with all the power of cloud and compute speed and flexibility and not having to set up data centers just to implement security technologies, plus having that machine learning mathematical backbone in the actual agent itself. It's lightweight, it works, it's predictive, it's quiet, you don't even know it's there, it just does its job. So it's a totally different proposition.
In your experience, you spoke about before, it's inevitable of this world that we live in that you guys are probably going to start getting disrupted by the next player. How do you think a company should sort of stay ahead of that? Will it just be through acquisition? In terms of, well, these guys are doing something really interesting, we may as well just acquire them, just to stay ahead, because things can change daily, and people who are at the top of their game, because it's well and good to say, oh, well, we're number one, but you have to sustain that level, which I think is very, very hard in what we all do today, because there could be some up-and-coming little guy that just sort of takes the cake.
Yeah, and that's the fun part about tech, right? There's always someone. And I love that. Like, it's great. And I think the companies who do it really well have a great mix. Like, you have to have really solid investment in your own R&D, right? Like, you can't just live off acquisition, because trying to integrate products from all different things can become a nightmare and messy. So you have to have a really strong foundation of innovation and R&D. In BlackBerry, for example, we have this thing called BlackBerry Labs, which is basically R&D innovation hub for the company. I think there's like 300 data scientists and whole bunch of other smart people who are way smarter than me, but they basically sit there and think about, well, what's the next big thing, right, in the field of AI, machine learning, security, automobile, whatever it may be, right?
What's the next big thing?
I think true AI properly, right? Like, I mean, it's easy to say because we're already sort of on the journey, but the reality is if we can move from what we have today, which is machine learning, to true cognitive decision-making, explainability and AI, it will continue to just change the game of everything that we do. We really want to get to a point where the device protects itself without human intervention.
Do you think that freaks people out, though? Just when you say
totally, yeah. It's back to that control piece. It's that control, right?
Yeah. Of course. I've been doing this for 40 years. What am I going to do now?
Exactly. You want the level of control. I think it just comes down to rather than how do we handle this, how do we adapt at the same time? Because this is going to happen whether we like it or not.
Correct. So it doesn't matter how you feel about it.
Doesn't matter if you're emotive about it. You need to think, okay, well, how do I make the most of this situation?
Sure.
So you'll see, again, talking about today's world, a lot of security roles are primarily admin kind of roles or policy roles. Very important as well. But those technical admin roles will probably dissipate.
Correct.
And we'll actually have better skills.
Yes.
Right? Which I think is a great place to be in. Why wouldn't you want a system to do all the boring stuff?
And that's what I said earlier.
And we get to do the fun stuff.
Correct. I don't think everyone thinks like that, though.
They don't, because they're so used to doing what they've been doing. People like I like consistency. I have my little routine. You wake up, go to the gym, get your coffee, come to work, do this, do that. You know, you can predict what your day and life's going to be like.
Right.
And it's not going to be turned upside down and, you know, we'll be, you know, working on a spaceship or whatever it may be. But
cool, yeah.
That would be pretty cool. I'd probably do it. But the reality is work maybe today and in 5 years' time as a security analyst might be completely different. I hope it is. Because, while a lot of those roles will be fulfilling, I think there'd be a lot of, this is pretty boring. It's not really what I thought it was going to be. And hopefully that changes with tech.
Jason, don't you think of people... So I agree with your level of thinking, but a lot of people don't think about, well, if we don't evolve, we're probably doing better disservice to the security industry. So that, to me, it feels so jarring in the sense that we're here to secure organisations and individuals, but yet we don't want to disrupt the thing that we do when the whole reason we're in that job is to secure and secure these organisations and companies. So for me, it sort of feels like we're doing them a disservice because we're so afraid that our job will become redundant, obsolete, and our skills will then atrophy.
Yeah. I mean, there's like a saying, you know, data is king, data is power, and it's the same in security. Like, we want to see more, hear more, to do more, because it makes us empowered. It makes us feel like we're doing things. But the problem is we're losing.
Right.
We're nowhere near winning, right? We're not even close.
Sure.
And I don't, like, that's a personal opinion, but all you have to do is open the news and you can see that we're not winning, right?
Yes.
Every day there is this hospital, this retailer, that logistics company.
Sure.
It's never ending. So we're nowhere near winning the battle. And it's because we're so reactive. And it's because we're so manual.
Correct.
So I think as soon as people can grasp that as this is going to help us get to a winning position, mentally, I think people will be able to adapt to be a bit more comfortable with it. It's not about, Cylance is not going to replace your job. Microsoft is not going to replace your job. It's just going to give you a different role, a different type of role, or enhance your role where you're not doing admin, you're doing other stuff, threat management, right? So that's what it's really all about, is increasing enhancement in skills rather than doing basic skills, right? Now, basic security hygiene, 100% important. Not many organisations even do that well today. But that's also a systemic problem of being in this whack-a-mole firefighter mode, because how do you have time to do all that when you're constantly putting the fire out, right? So something's got to change, and the adversary is not going to wait for us to make that decision. They're like, yeah, this is great. A, it's so easy to bypass you. B, you're too busy to even know what I'm doing. And then I've got your data and I'm gone anyway. So,
do you think we'll get to a stage where people are out of this firefighting whack-a-mole sort of game? Or do you think that we're still a while away from that stage? Just in your experience.
Yeah, I mean, don't get me wrong, it's like that might have sounded a little bit negative towards our industry. I think everybody wants to get to a nirvana of, we feel a bit more comfortable and we're on top of things. No one really wants to be in that whack-a-mole situation, right?
It's tiring and draining.
Exactly. And also, especially if you're in critical industries, it could be very, very stressful. Like, I've seen some really stressful environments in health and things where it's just not been a good situation, not even just for the security team, but for general citizens. So I don't think anyone really wants to be there. I think as an industry, I feel like there's still the hesitation. And I think the hesitation, I think it's two things. I think there's part of it is the cultural aspect of the job thing that we talked about. But then I think the second part is literally the overwhelming FUD that comes from the vendor community about the threat landscape aligned to things like machine learning and AI and, everything else that people become a little bit numb to it, and they're like, I just don't want to listen to you anymore, right? So all of the goodness, because there's a lot of good information that comes out from some of the, these innovative companies, but a lot of the goodness gets lost in the fact that it's another sexy brochure that says machine learning and AI or some other buzzword.
Yes. And
people start to glaze over it a little bit because they're just so overwhelmed with all that information. I don't know what the answer is to fix that.
In terms of navigating
through the FUD, I mean, one of the things I'd really love to see in our industry is we actually have proper standards for evaluation and technology. Like, we have the analyst firms like Gartner and Forrester, and they do some great research and reporting and things like that. But the reality is, like, all of these things are opinions. It's what does one person think this should look like, or it should do this thing, or it should have this feature. But there's no, like, you buy a car and you get an Amstar safety rating of
you have to have an
2.5 or 3.5 or whatever.
Yes.
You have to have these things, right?
There's in order to sell then a vehicle.
Exactly. And then as a consumer, you can look at it and say, okay, well, that one's got a 5-star, this one's got a 4-star, this is the difference. I want the 4-star because it's 10 grand cheaper and I'm comfortable with that, or I want the 5-star because it's this. There's not really any of that in the security industry across the board. So there's not really any true quality assurance. So the only way to really ascertain that is to test for yourself, which we would always advocate anyway, right? We'd be like, yeah, go and break it as much as you can, because then you know how far it can go and can't go. The challenge is not all organisations can do that, right? So then it comes down to, well, how many good analyst reports do you have that someone's opinion, or how many paid testing programs have you been through that you've probably gained the results anyway, right? It just becomes this back and forth debate about which report means more than the other, when the reality is they both probably don't mean anything, right? Because internal organisation is very different to another one. So I think if we can come up with a buyer's framework somehow, and I don't know who the responsibility should lay with to decide what that looks like, but a truly agnostic, technical and business framework for deciding, how the solutions fit and play. There's a lot of things like Gartner peer reviews and things like that where customers put their own feedback and things on, which are really important. But again, at the end of the day, everybody's got different goals, so it's really difficult to rank that.
Different maturity stages, different industries.
Yeah, exactly. Like, I'd love to say Cylance is great for every single customer, but it's not, because it could be too much for somebody. They don't have the skills to really take the full power of that product and make the most of it, where others will, right? It's just varying on differences. But again, if we had that level of maturity framework in assessment, that might actually help people move faster towards this model of more autonomous solutions being implemented in the market. And whether it's, Cylance, BlackBerry, Microsoft, CrowdStrike, whoever it is, it would be good for the industry in general to do that. So I don't know if you know someone, it'd be great for someone to come up with something, but I think that would be really good.
I found it really interesting just what you were saying, and I think that from what I sort of see personally is that people just feel incredibly overwhelmed. You've got 50 bazillion vendors knocking on their doors, like, yes, we're AI, machine learning and all that, so it's really about how to cut through that. But I think giving the power back in the client's hands to go and do their own reconnaissance work, their own research, get their own team to deploy a POC and test it out for themselves, and then say, hey, this is exactly what we need. And I think that, I guess even you coming on this podcast is trying to, again, we're trying to give people real answers to their questions.
Yeah.
And I think if people become perhaps a little bit more honest in what they do and can convey that in ways that people would become more trusting of those vendors and those integrators.
Yeah, and I mean, ethics in IT and security is a massive topic. Like, I find it fascinating, and something that we really, with my team, we really embrace, like, strongly, is total honesty, because the worst thing you can do, like, lie about something to get a deal, but then 2 weeks later that company is massively impacted because you sold them a fallacy. It's really short-sighted. And also, like, I don't know, my core belief is I just couldn't do that to somebody. Like, personally, I would feel horrible about that, because you just put that person in an extremely vulnerable position, and who am I to do that? But the reality is that happens all the time in this industry, because everybody is so motivated by money, dollars. So doing the right thing sometimes just gets thrown way out the window. And I think for us, which is why we have a really great ecosystem of customers and partners and people that we work with, and I feel like we have a really trusting business here. I will often sit in front of some of our customers and they'll ask me about something, and I say, look, I can't help you with that, but here's a suggestion or an idea. Trying to fit a round peg through a square hole kind of thing, it's just not the right way to go about it. So I think, again, there's some responsibility on the vendor side to be able to be honest and transparent, and salespeople are not necessarily comfortable with that, because maybe
their job depends on them
getting sales.
Correct.
Right? And they're under so much pressure to meet targets and hit revenue targets, whatever it may be. But the reality is, maybe you lose a deal because you're honest.
Correct.
I guarantee you'll win 10 more after that.
Absolutely.
Because that person will say, when a person asks for a reference, I remember Chris, or I remember Jason, really honest, really enjoyed the engagement. It wasn't quite right for us, but if they had a product that was right, I would definitely work with them.
Correct. So it's about being honest. So would you say, in terms of your viewpoints of the industry moving forward, probably due to this 2020 year, what is some of your sort of beliefs that will happen in the future now that we are sort of traversing into this new world and this new way of operating? Like, what do you sort of see?
Yeah. I didn't think 2020 would be a pandemic year, so I don't know what 2021 is going to be like, but I just think, we're a very resilient species as humans, right? Like, we get knocked down, we pick ourselves back up, and we find a way to be successful again. That's why the human race is the dominant race on the planet. Yeah. Maybe the comet helped with the dinosaurs or whatever, but,
sure.
We've evolved since then. I think for us, like, the notion of physical workspaces naturally have changed. They were changing anyway. I think the ability to, and this is also a potential challenge, is like, where do we draw the line between physical work and emotional work and personal life and emotionally personal life? Because, probably similar to you, but like for me, it's sometimes really difficult to turn off because work is in your pocket all the time, and it's always buzzing and dinging, and there's an email coming in at 11 o'clock at night, and you know that you shouldn't check it, but you're like, I'll just quickly have a look, like it might be important. And that's exacerbated now because, I know we're in the office today, but 4 days a week I'm at home where I also sleep.
Correct.
Where my dog is, where my life is,
correct.
Where I sit down and watch murder mysteries and TV, and then I turn around and then that's my desk. So it becomes a really hazy environment of how do you separate yourself, and I think that's going to be a real challenge for people.
Having like accurate boundaries.
Yeah, right. And also from an interaction perspective, there's a huge that as well, right? Because you know what it's like Zoom fatigue and being on video calls. I'm so exhausted. Like, I would totally do 8 back-to-back meetings throughout the day, because you go for a coffee or you go like face-to-face. You go for a coffee, you go for a walk, go for a beer after work, go for lunch, whatever it may be. Like, you're having kind of physical stimulation at the same time. You sit on a Zoom call or a WebEx, and it's like the life is draining from my eyeballs every single time I'm on the WebEx, especially by the end of a long day. And I don't think I'll be alone in that. I think most people would feel the same. So I think having that delineation and boundary of how do you operate is going to be interesting from a human perspective. From a security perspective, we kind of slapped a Band-Aid on it straight away, and threw out VPNs and, set up more virtual infrastructure and a bunch of other stuff. Now we're looking at, well, how do we optimize that? Is that really the best situation to have everyone remoting in to the corporate network? And then the conversation is, well, do we really need everything in the data center? Can we just put it in the cloud?
Correct.
So we're kind of accelerating that digital transformation aspect of how do we do work. But also there's a huge encouragement for things like, tablets and iPads and phones and personal devices. Again, where do those boundaries kind of fit? So there'll be an interesting challenge for employers who are enabling work-life flexibility. People don't really, if they don't feel so safe coming to the office yet, even though we're in a pretty good state here with coronavirus, or they've had to change their life with their kids or families and they need to be at home more, enabling that, but also enabling them to still disconnect is going to be really interesting to see. From a security perspective, work from home is a totally different beast in comparison to work from office. When you're in the office, you've got 50 firewalls and proxies and monitoring and all these other tools and technologies that are constantly checking and dinging and buzzing and whatever else. A lot of companies have been able to pivot with that and, put in cloud technologies and a bunch of other stuff for personal devices, but a lot haven't. So a lot of them are just direct to internet, might have an antivirus on that PC or tablet or whatever it may be. There's not really any data controls. There's not really any access controls. So having that data center centric security model where we put the walls up and don't let anyone in to bringing the walls down and having a risk management approach is a huge change. And I think that's where, things like what we do from an endpoint security perspective with cloud technologies and adoption of that has been great through this period because it's not dependent on the data center. It literally goes agent on the device and off we go. So taking that concept of every device is now the new perimeter is really the frontier of security, which is why you're seeing, the emergence of secure access service edge and those kind of new capabilities with routing traffic direct from device. So probably the three things, like the people like personal approach. It's that separation and boundary and how do employers facilitate that with their staff. Because, I think everybody is just waiting for this year to be over because you're really burnt out, right? You just want to decompress and rest. Yes. And then the third aspect is how do you adapt to the security aspects of not being in the corporate office, which I think we're in a pretty good position for here at BlackBerry with what we do. So it'll benefit some and not benefit others. But again, this is the being honest and also the innovation and disruption cycle. It will be pretty interesting to see what new technologies pop up over the next 12 months because of the pandemic and how we now operate. I don't know what will, but
I guess we'll see. So, Jason, I've absolutely loved our chat today. Thank you so much for being honest, going into detail about what BlackBerry does. If people have any questions for you that perhaps I didn't ask, how can they go about finding you?
Yeah, so I'm on LinkedIn, so Jason Duerden. Feel free to stalk me and add me. I'm pretty available. Go to blackberry.com, have a look at our products and services. We're pretty frequent on, like all the kind of marketing aspects of Gartner and Forrester and a bunch of other things. But give us a call, talk to us. If you want to learn a bit more, we're more than happy to tell our story and do the song and dance.
So you move away from the handsets?
Yes. Well, hopefully, I think the goal is we get to a point where we don't even have to have that conversation. But the reality is that's going to take a little bit of time.
Thanks for tuning in to KB Cast, the cybersecurity podcast for executives. We always value your support and would love it if you could leave us a review or a comment on your platform of choice, iTunes, Stitcher, or Google Play, and that's always appreciated. Till next time.